Hello there, welcome to Gardener's World. Thanks for joining me. On today's show, we've got a show all about Freemasonry from a guy who really ought to know, because he's a Freemason and he's a doctor, not a medical doctor. He lectures at, I think it's Liverpool University, isn't it?
Yeah, I do some there, yeah.
And his name is David Harrison, and he's written this new book, The Genesis of Freemasonry, which is very, very interesting because it highlights several things that most people don't actually normally get involved in. It certainly goes back a little bit further than the standard history that we have. David, thank you very much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me on the show.
Nice of you to come. So, you know, why another book on the genesis or the origin of Freemasonry?
Well, this was actually my PhD thesis, and when I started it back in 2001, there wasn't that many historical views on Freemasonry. It was all about Rosslyn Chapel and the Knights Templar, all the secret stuff. Yeah. So when I kind of approached a PhD supervisor, he said, "Oh, well, why not Freemasonry? You know, that sounds good. You know, we could build something there." So it started from that, and we just ended up doing the thesis, and I finally finished that about 2007, I think it was. And from the very start of it, my supervisor said, well, this would be a great popular book. Rather than just have it academically published and, 500 copies goes around the libraries, then this could be, this could make a bit of an impact because it's quite, focused and particular on a subject matter that's not really been looked at academically before. Yeah.
Now, I mean, a lot of people that are watching this will be knowledgeable about conspiracy theories. They will know, a lot about the Freemasons. A lot of people watching it will say that Freemasons sacrifice babies and all kinds of things, and that you rule in the world, and that the top Grand Master somewhere is sat in a dark room with a white cat stroking it, ordering all you little minions around, and they'll be questioning, why we should trust a book. Forgive me. Yeah. That's written. Were you a Freemason when you started this?
I was, yeah. I first joined in about 1998 or 99, I think it was, and it was just something that I was invited into. I thought, well, I'll check it out, and it might not be for me.
You were invited.
Yeah. It was a few people kind of that I knew were involved in this particular lodge, and they said, oh, you might kind of like it, just give it a go. And I was interested in history, always interested in history, and I just finished my degree, which was in Welsh history, believe it or not. And I'd just got into the kind of secret thing, the 18th century kind of secret society stuff, and meeting in these taverns and all these kind of aristocracy. And so that kind of intrigued me. And the fact that it was still existing as well. And when I first went into the lodge, I kind of saw it through the eyes of a historian. It was typically Victorian, really, to me. So I like the history of it, really, and that's what drew me in. And then a few years later, when I was asked to do the PhD, I realised that there was all this history that had been written that wasn't really that good. It didn't answer the questions that I was asking, and so I thought, well, I'll do the research and try and come up with the answers. So that's what started it and blended in with the PhD.
And so, as a non-historian, Freemason, and a lot of the people watching this won't be Freemasons, they'll be questioning your background, because there is a lot of suspicion around Freemasonry. Yeah. And I mean, I know many Freemasons, and I know an awful lot of people who don't trust Freemasons and write those conspiracy books and the conspiracy films, and there'll be those questions there. Why should we trust the book that you've written on Freemasonry? You're a Freemason.
That's right.
You're not independent.
That's right.
Have you written this from an independent point of view?
I have, yeah.
How did you find that difficult?
It was really. I mean, with it being a PhD, you get these supervisors, these university professors,
well, they'll be
doctors.
Freemasons anyway.
Surprisingly, they weren't. They were. But there is. I did it at the University of Liverpool, and there is a University of Liverpool lodge, which I never knew anything about. It was that secret that I didn't even know. I didn't even know it was there. But my supervisors weren't Freemasons. They were looking at it. They kind of helped me with that view, really, you know, with the independent view. And with it being a PhD, it had to be historically accurate in regards to looking at the documents. And
because a PhD has to go to like peer review, doesn't it?
yeah, that's right. And it was Professor Simon Schaefer that actually was the external.
The Simon Schaefer.
From the University of Cambridge.
Yeah. Know the man.
Yeah, has he been on here? He's done a few TV things, I believe, because I can remember him telling me about them. But so yeah, he was interested in it because obviously there'd been so much rubbish about Freemasonry, and he wanted to see, you know, what the truth was really, or you know, as far as you could go, you know. And he was also interested in Newton and Christopher Wren. Which also feature in the book. Newton isn't a Freemason, or wasn't a Freemason, but Wren was. So there was these historical figures that had contributed to British society in the 17th and 18th century, you know, that were involved in this.
So the fact that you've got a benchmark, a measurement here of a PhD, that's what you're saying is what makes this independent? Yeah.
It's looking at things from a historical perspective and looking at the actual archive material and the documents. I mean, you've still got to suggest things. You know, you've got to say, well, there's no documents for that, but there's this and that.
So you have to take a few leaps.
Yeah. I think you've got to do that in every aspect of work, really.
You're kind of implying that historians or pseudo-historians of Freemasonry have, in the past, been taking too many leaps. What are some of the things that those leaps? Templars, for instance.
Yeah, the Templars, for example. I mean, I know a lot of medieval historians and Templar historians that straight away say there's no evidence whatsoever to suggest that the Templars escaped in the early 14th century and came to England or Scotland.
Ran up to Roslin.
Yeah, ran up to Roslin and
Battle of Bannockburn.
That's right. Helped Robert the Bruce out, and you know, and
came down the hillside in their steads.
That's right. That's
story.
right.
Exactly. And there's no evidence for that.
There's no evidence for that at all. There's no documents. It's just So
you're telling me that in the 15th century it wasn't the Freemasons that built Roslin Chapel?
Definitely not. No.
Oh
no.
It was the aliens then.
Oh, the aliens, definitely.
Okay. So the Templars is a no-no. The Freemasons didn't come from the Templars.
That's right. Yeah, there's no connection. There's no joint. These kind of writers, and you know, the good books to read. I've got them at home. I've read them. You know,
there's several of them on here.
Yeah, the great kind of, you know, you're in bed taking it easy on a cold winter's night. You know, fantastic.
See, I mean, I've got a lot of people that have been on here that do say this. You know, Tim Wallace Murphy is one of them who writes, you know, books on Roslin, and he's a Freemason and he writes Freemasonic books, and he'll say again and again and again, you know, they came from the Templars because the Templars were hiding this sacred knowledge of the Gnosis and and it's something that goes back through the Templars in time, back to Egypt, etc. All of that's fluff.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Without a doubt. Yeah, there was an excellent book actually by a guy called Bob Cooper who wrote The Roslin Hoax.
Yeah.
Wasn't
that from the same publisher, though, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
Which just happens to be, sorry to get my conspiracy theorist head on, which just happens to be Lewis Masonic.
That's right, yeah. The same.
Which is a Freemasonic publisher.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, so, again, why should we believe that Roslin Hoax and that Tim Wallace are wrong?
Well, at the same time, there's Lewis Masonic have published, you know, stuff like that, and you know, Roslin, Templars, you know, that kind of stuff. So there's the two views at the moment, I think. There's this fantasy view, where I call it, or the speculative view, really, is probably the correct term for it, where, you know, the Templars come down, rescue Robert the Bruce and Roslin Chapel.
What you're saying is from a scholarly point of view, there is no texts.
Yeah, there's no link.
No evidence. We've got no archaeological evidence. We've got no textual evidence.
Nothing. No.
No letters. No diaries. Nothing to link from the 14th century to the, what you're pointing out, 17th century.
Yeah.
It's quite a gap, really.
Yeah, with the Templars. The Templars. There's no link. The only in the 19th century there was actual Masonic historians. They were actually publishing stuff saying, "Oh, this Templars stuff that's been being discussed that we're linked to the Templars is rubbish," you know, and they were even saying it then, you know.
But they were also saying, of course, Freemasons were also saying that there was.
Yeah, that's right.
So even within Freemasonry, there's this argument.
That's right. That's right.
And a lot of them use the argument that there is a Templar degree.
Yeah, yeah.
What about that?
Well, that only comes from the 18th century. That developed from then. All the rituals, these extended rituals, like the Knights Templar and the Mark Mason degree and all of these kind of stuff. That's 18th century. And I even suggest in the book as well how those came about, and especially with the third degree, where there's some evidence to suggest that it was written by a guy called Dr. Jean Theophilus Desaguliers. Yeah. Trying to say that when you've had a few pints. That's, no. It's terrible. He was basically the I was going to say the father of modern Freemason, really, and I think he is in a way. He was a guy that came along. He was a French Huguenot by descent, and he came to London, and he was a natural philosopher. He was a friend of Isaac Newton. He was in the Royal Society, and he helped to mould modern Freemasonry. And when the Grand Lodge, the premier modern Grand Lodge, started in 1717 in London, that's when he got involved. And in the 1720s, he created this third degree. And hence we've got the 3 degrees in Freemasonry now. Before that, there was only 2, really. The apprentice and fellowcraft. And Desaguliers, he came along, created this third degree with a lot of imagery regarding Solomon's Temple and the cycles within Solomon's Temple and death and rebirth. And an influence on him was Sir Isaac Newton, who was into his alchemy. Oh, yeah. And he was obsessed with Solomon's Temple, as was Christopher Wren as well. So that's basically...
weren't the Freemasons obsessed with Solomon's Temple before these guys? Because this is what they tell us.
Yeah,
this is the tradition.
That's right. I suppose with Solomon's Temple, it was always, with it being mentioned in the Bible and being an important central symbol in the Bible, really.
The house of God.
Yeah, an architectural kind of embodiment of God, if you like, the divine word of God within architecture. So I suppose it was always important to them in that respect, but it wasn't until the 18th century that this degree ritual came about.
Right.
So
that's interesting. But really, I mean, in essence, I mean, we've only got like half a minute left before the break. But in essence, you're saying because of the lack of evidence, that means it's not true. But it could be true, couldn't it?
Yeah,
could it be true?
There is the thing with Freemasonry, with it being a secret society, there is a lack of evidence. Yeah. So, but
just because Newton, doesn't have his name on a list of rolls anywhere, doesn't mean he wasn't a Freemason. Because I've done some research on various people like Jules Verne, etc.
Oh yeah.
And the influences that the guy had around him and the things that he wrote and did
is amazing. Yeah.
It's like it points to the fact that the bloke was a Freemason, or was highly influenced by them.
Yeah.
But you've got French Revolution going off, and you've got all kinds of different. So a lot of the rolls were destroyed or hidden because of politics.
That's right.
Could it be that Newton had a similar? But what we're getting is that this is a book about the actual real evidence that exists, and it's not about making the leaps that we were talking about before the break, where we're saying that just because there aren't texts to say, and the Knights Templar rested themselves in Roslin Chapel and built this wonderful thing there, just because those texts aren't there, you're saying that means it's not necessarily true, or do you think that it may be possible? Give somebody a glimmer of hope out there, because there's 1,000 books all based on that theory.
Yeah. Well, they'll probably sell anyway, because the majority of them are good reads anyway.
So you think that there is no link, definite?
Definite no link whatsoever.
So what is the origin of Freemasonry? If it's not in the Knights Templars who got it from Jerusalem, digging below the temple, and before that Egypt, and before that wherever. Yeah. If it's not that, is it just simply that a bunch of stonemasons wanted to set up some kind of, union?
That's it, really. Yeah, the Freemasons, Freestone Masons, were like a guild.
What's a freestone mason as opposed to a mason?
A freestone mason is someone that works in limestone and which is
So they do all the nice, pretty faces and
yeah,
flowers and
and it's a bit more kind of upmarket than the sandstone. I mean, most cathedrals and the medieval cathedrals and medieval churches are built out of sandstone, because there's a lot of it around in Britain.
And so, what's a speculative mason?
Well, the speculative Freemasons, they started around about the very, very late 1500s and the 1600s, and you get a lot of the old lodges, the guild lodges, kind of basically dying off a bit. You know,
But these aren't the
they're kind of
lodges as
struggling.
we see them today, are they? They're not.
No, they're
not
different. Yeah.
ordinary people who can't touch, do anything with stone. These were real stonemasons.
These were real stonemasons.
And they were set up at places like cathedrals and churches and...
Yeah, or they'd travel around a lot as well. They'd work on a cathedral probably for about 40, 50 years, and then that one would be finished, and then they might have to go off and repair another one, so there'd be a bit more work 20 miles down the road or something like that. By the time you get to the late 1500s, and especially the 1600s, the 17th century, you get a lot of people entering these lodges, for special reasons. And there's an incident of that in Warrington, which is where I'm from. There was a guy called Elias Ashmole, who's quite famous.
The Ashmolean Museum,
That's
Oxford,
right.
yeah.
That's the one. And he actually was fighting in the Civil War in the 1640s.
Yes.
By 1646, there's the parliamentarians are getting the upper hand and have almost won the first stage of the war.
Yeah.
Ashmole was fighting as a royalist, and he was in Worcester, in the siege of Worcester. And they lost that battle, and he kind of scarpered, and he headed up towards Cheshire, where his first wife's father still resided, in a place called Smallwood, which is still there to this day. His first wife had died, and he kind of resided with his father-in-law, really, to heal himself, I suppose, because he'd just lost his mother on the way back. The land was ravaged with war.
Yeah.
The royalist cause was finished in their eyes at that time. That was about July, and then by the time you get to October in 1646, he's entering a lodge in Warrington.
Right.
And
he's obviously not a stonemason, so...
That's right. And he's been made a mason with a parliamentarian called Henry Mainwaring, who's a cousin of his father-in-law. So it's quite strange that you've got this this stern royalist and this stern parliamentarian.
And is this the earliest that we've got?
In England, yeah.
In England?
Yeah.
So we've got earlier elsewhere?
Yeah, in Scotland, there's a couple of old lodges, one particular lodge in Edinburgh that has minutes dating from I think it's 1599. And they were a stonemasons lodge, and they had started kind of accepting these local bigwigs, if you like.
Right.
And so you see the same thing going on. These stonemason lodges are kind of accepting these people that aren't masons, and they're the speculative masons that are coming in, as opposed to the operative masons. So
this could have been stained glass window unions or anything that developed into what we've got today.
That's right. The carpenters or the wheelwrights or the difference with the masons was that they were very, very popular anyway. Because they built these cathedrals and these churches, they'd build these houses of God, if you like.
Now that opens up another question, because modern Freemasonry, of course, there are a few sides to it. There's the political side and the let's have a drink, pal side, and get me off of that parking fine.
That parking fine.
And then there's the other side, which is like the esoteric side, where people are kind of drawn to that side because they want to know a bit more, and they think that there's a secret to living and to the universe and to the divine or the grand architect or great architect or whatever you want to call it. So there's that two sides, as one Freemason always said to me, is the political side and the esoteric.
Yeah.
But you're going back to that period there where in what you call modern Freemasonry, start of that, where they're really into the Temple of Solomon, they're really into sacred geometry, etc. But back to the original stonemasons that you're talking about, who were the ones building the cathedrals and had been for an awful long time and had got that knowledge from somewhere, crusades, etc., etc. they were using sacred geometry, obviously, to build those buildings.
That's right.
You can go and measure that now and say,
Yeah.
this is in the divine proportions of
That's right.
Vitruvian man on the ground.
Chester Cathedral or whatever, or yeah.
So they had a kind of
churches.
sacred knowledge already.
Yeah.
Is that why they were so popular?
That's probably why, yeah, because they were building, these divine buildings, the houses of God, basically.
Yeah.
Sacred buildings. And one of the reasons why in the Civil War, the English Civil War in particular, that they kind of like became really popular was because they had still had these rules, basically, where when they opened a lodge, it was a sacred space. So, and you weren't allowed to talk about politics or religion, as you still aren't today, you know.
Yeah.
So, hence you get these
Of
two
course.
big figures coming in, this Elisha Ashmole royalist, Henry Mainwaring parliamentarian.
Can you see why conspiracy theorists jump all over this stuff?
Oh, yeah.
You can also
it's
see...
rife for
Yeah, it's rife.
rich pickings for...
You've got the American Civil War going off, for instance, and
Yeah.
you've got battles being fought, ordinary people being killed left, right and centre, and then the officers going off into a mobile lodge
Yeah.
from both sides, deciding on the outlaw, maybe
the outcome of the battle.
outcome of the battle next day.
Yeah,
You can see
yeah.
why people jump at conspiracies.
Oh, yeah.
Because
It's,
there's conspiracies.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
There
yeah.
has to be.
I think anywhere where there's potential secrecy, there's conspiracies, or a conspiracy theory, or a...
Unelected officials
Yeah,
deciding our future.
Yeah.
Is that
yeah,
right?
Yeah, I mean...
You're a Freemason, is that right?
Oh, no. I mean, one of the things with Freemasonry, when it started off, was that it was democratic.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, when it was first founded, the Premier Modern Lodge in 1717, I say modern as well because in 1751 there was an Ancients Grand Lodge that offshot.
Which they spelt wrong.
Yeah, that's right, with a T instead of the C. Yeah. And at the very beginning, for the first 3 or 4 years, it was elected Grand Masters, drawn from the actual, lodge members, Grand Lodge members. Yeah. Desagoulier himself was a Grand Master for a year, and 2 other Grand Masters were, basically drawn from the common men. There was a guy called Anthony Payne, who was a bookshop owner,
But then it changed.
It changed.
And the Royals came
Anthony
back.
Sayer, I should say.
Sayer.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right.
The Royals came back.
The Royals, or the aristocracy, were
came
invited back, and you get the Duke of Montague and the Duke of Wharton, all being invited in and being Grand Masters, and you see this influx of the aristocracy, and then you see the royal family joining. There was Frederick, the Prince of Wales, joined, and you get this influx of the aristocracy and the royalty and the democracy from Freemasonry seems to have been basically put on the side somewhere,
There's power battles going off there, isn't there?
Yeah. So you can see where the conspiracy theorists can say, there's something a bit
I don't
missing
think
there.
it's too big a leap, personally.
Yeah. This is it. Yeah. For people that aren't Freemasons, it's like,
That's dodgy.
Yeah.
But getting back to the point, that the early stonemasons were building sacred geometry into those buildings. They had to get that knowledge from somewhere.
Yeah.
Now, it's assumed by a lot of historians that I know that they got a lot of that mathematics on building the arch and all those other things from the period of the Crusades, when we were over there.
Yeah.
Now you can see why pseudo-historians or Templar historians point to Templars.
Yeah.
Because obviously, ever since the demise of the Templars, there's been stories about them.
Oh, yeah.
And they were supposed to have got this so-called secret from below the Temple of Solomon. Can you see why that's the case?
Yeah,
it kind of makes sense.
The thing with the Templars, you see, is that they're a very romantic, historical bunch of people. Bunch of men, really. These warriors with the Red Cross and escorting people to the Holy Land.
And their brothers were the Cistercians. Yeah?
Yeah.
And they were the ones that were highly responsible for an awful lot of the building projects that were going off in Europe post-Crusades.
Yeah, I mean, you get this kind of...
See, there's a...
Yeah, there's I can see where people kind of say, oh, well, you know, they could have influenced them and secret society going on in the medieval times. And then, of course, you get this kind of Holy Grail aspect to it as well, where, you know, the Templars have discovered some secret.
Yeah.
And
the little kiddies of Jesus and Mary.
Yeah.
Yes.
And, you know, so it can go either way, you see. When you start looking at the Templars, there's such a great historical group of knights, you know, that they create this romance and you know, so you can develop these romantic views quite easily.
But there's no actual odd evidence. It is purely supposition.
That's right. I mean, the Holy Grail, that's a story that will probably be with us forever. You know, it's a story that was linked to older sources, you know, Celtic sources even. And it's been adopted by different people for different things, you know. So, so the Templars are, I mean, they're a great kind of historical bunch of people to write on because they're so romantic, and you know, it's boys' own stuff.
Enigmatic
basically.
because the evidence is thin.
Basically, yeah.
Now, one of the things that's in your book, just to let's get a little bit more modern then, and let's ignore the Templars now, because we've covered the Templars, is a man that I've always been fascinated by, and a lot of people will be, because, you know, he's been involved in a lot of different secret societies, or implicated in things like the Rosicrucians, etc. John Dee.
Oh, John Dee.
John Dee.
John Dee, yeah.
Fascinating character. We've got about half a minute left. But, you know, just introduce John Dee to people and we'll talk a bit more.
Well, John Dee was a magician, basically. He was searching for lost knowledge in the Tudor period, really, the late Tudor period. And he claims to have found it. So,
found what?
The lost knowledge.
Oh, so after the break, what we'll be doing is talking to the author of Genesis of Freemasonry, David Harrison, on the lost knowledge that Dr. John Dee, and Dr. John Dee, I mean, he was a magician, but he was also, you know, he had a great library, he worked for the Queen. Necromancer.
Alchemist.
Dr. John Dee, obviously had his friend Edward Kelly, and, you know, the guy who could contact the dead for him, and and all this necromancy, and it's claimed that he raised the dead, and various other things, and it's also claimed that he was a spy for Queen Elizabeth. Yeah.
Again, he's an excellent historical figure that's just, the romance that he can attract is unbelievable, you know, because he did so much, and he survived with it as well, you know, and this is in a period where, especially when King James came to the throne in 1603, where witches started to be persecuted, and he was still there doing his magic, and
he had too many things on too many people.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
But why is John Dee involved in a book on the origins of Freemasonry? Well,
John Dee was. You mentioned about Edward Kelly and raising the dead. You're probably familiar with this. They supposedly raised a dead person from St Leonard's churchyard in Walton-le-Dale near Preston.
Yes.
And this was supposedly a successful raising. It's been written about for, you know, over the 100 years or so. You know, there's a great book in the 19th century about him, with great prints where he's actually raising this person from the graveyard. Fantastic stuff. And he used this ritual, and the ritual, when I looked at the actual documents, it was very similar to the third degree in Freemasonry.
Right.
And there's all kinds of different things in the third degree Masonic raising degree, as they call it, where basically the Freemason is put down into a figurative grave, and they attempt to pull him up, and on the third time they successfully raise him from this grave. And it's all about the Mason being reborn and into a world of enlightenment and knowledge, and you know.
He comes into the room in darkness.
That's right. That's right.
And is risen in light.
Yeah. That's the one. Very similar to the raising.
And you're associating that with this necromancy of John Dee.
Yeah.
As in that he didn't really do it, and that this is symbolic. It's
symbolic. I mean, it's hard to say if John Dee did it or not. He's an amazing historical character. He definitely knew, when I mentioned before about the search for lost knowledge, he was always searching for anything that might kind of give him knowledge about the universe.
Yeah.
And
I mean, an extensive library, didn't he?
He did.
Collected from all
That's
over the
right.
place. I mean,
And part of that library ended up with Elias Ashmole. So there's a link there, you see.
yeah.
So, and Elias Ashmole was an alchemist. He actually looked at John Dee's work and, you know, tried to do all kinds of things. Because being involved in alchemy isn't just about turning base metal into gold. It's about finding eternal life, basically. It's
looking for the elixir.
That's right. That's right. And this is what Ashmole was searching for. He reckoned in John Dee's library the answers were there, and he was in contact with John Dee's son. So there's a link there anyway, and it's all about search for lost knowledge, hidden knowledge, and this is a theme within the Masonic ceremonies, the Masonic rituals, the search for lost knowledge.
And did you find it? Have the Freemasons found it? And are you going to tell us?
I don't think they did find it. It's all about, again, it's all about symbolism. It's about words and symbols that, you know, basically, to me anyway, it's about finding the knowledge within yourself. You know, it's as if the knowledge is already in there, and you've got to kind of work it out somehow. You know, you've got to. Again, it's pretty similar to the Holy Grail story, where you know only the purest can find it. You know? And when they do find it, you don't really find out what it was. You know, glowing lights and things.
Is it a plate? Is it a cup? Or is it Superman?
Yeah, that's right.
It serves only those who serve it.
So I think it's the secrets, the lost knowledge is within yourself, and you've got to kind of, you know, search.
So this is a very Gnostic principle that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that Freemasonry is accused of being, especially by Bible Belt America, which is where a lot of the real harder-edged conspiracy theorists against Freemasonry comes from, is the Christians, the fundamentals. And they accuse Freemasonry of being a religion. And you can see why. When, you know, you have your symbols and you've got the big G in the middle, which they take as God, you know, the great architect, etc. What is all that about?
Yeah.
Is it a religion?
It's not a religion. It's a society really that's anti-religious really, because any faith can join in theory. You know, so you've just got to believe in the grand architect, the supreme being, God, or you know, whatever.
And this is where it becomes a blurred area. So why it's easy for them to jump in, because you say you've got to believe in a grand architect, that somebody made all of this. So that rules out Richard Dawkins, you know, the greatest atheist that we've got. But you also have your rituals and your rules. Now, you know, religion means to be tied to something.
Yeah.
You can see where I'm going?
Yeah,
It's
definitely.
not a religion then?
It's, I suppose people that aren't Freemasons can think, oh, well, you know, there's something a bit, you know, there's something a bit dodgy on that one. Of course, it's got the ritualistic appeal, which, I mean, ritual is always tied in with the religion, whether it's Wicca or Christianity or wherever. You know, there's always a ritual there, because rituals are about the initiated. You know, we know this. You know, you come and join us, and we'll show you. You know, so it's that kind of thing, really. So I can see how people can view it as a religion because it's ritualistic. It's behind closed doors, and in the 18th and 19th centuries, there was because Freemasons used to meet on nights of the full moon in various little country villages. There's evidence to suggest that the local population was like, you know, what are they up to? You know, they're up to something dodgy. And you get a bit of kind of suspicion going on. And in the book I discussed that, where people have actually talked about, you know, oh, well, you know, they think we're witches, we're raising the devil at night when the moon's full.
Sacrificing kids.
Yeah, when really they were only meeting on the moon when the moon's full, because it gave off the light. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's like the Lunar Society. Yeah.
So why did the Catholics ban it?
That's a good question. I think that's about power again. There was a couple of people, a couple of Freemasons in the 18th century that are quite well known. There's a guy called John Cousteau, who was kind of captured by the Inquisition, and in Portugal. He was in Portugal, I believe, and he founded his own lodge, and the Inquisition knocked on his door, dragged him away, and he was like tortured, you know. And he ended up
treated like a good anti-Catholic.
Oh yeah,
yes.
yeah. And he was kind of he managed to get away. I think it was to do with some British consulate turned up and kind of, you know, said a few words for him and managed to get him off. And he wrote this book in the 18th century about his tortures, and you know, which was quite gruesome. And then there was another guy in the I think it was as late as the 1790s, who was friends with Count St Germain, who you've probably come across. Yeah,
whoever he was.
Whoever he was, yeah. Who was an alchemist as well. Yeah. He was into his alchemy, and associated with Freemasonry.
And every other secret society on the planet.
Yeah,
just about.
Yeah. And this other guy who knew Count St Germain and Casanova, he ended up being captured by the Inquisition, and
so you're saying
so
they built up kind of a bit of evidence against Freemasonry, or thought that Freemasonry was working against them? Yeah.
I think it's about power again, you know. It's about what are these guys doing, you know.
So are the Freemasons, you know, were they working on power trip? Were they trying to undermine the Catholic Church, the royals, etc.?
I think what was happening in the 18th century, because there was a lot of the Catholic threat in Britain, the Jacobites, for example.
Yeah.
There was an element of, you know, we're Protestant, and you know we're kind of symbolising this kind of English, Georgian, Hanoverian ideal. So there was elements of that. During the 18th century, of course, it was, you know, you do get this kind of Jacobite, Hanoverian thing going on, Catholic, Protestant thing.
A great surge of secret societies at that point as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Across Europe.
Yeah, that's right. They pop up all over Europe, in France, Germany, wherever, Italy even, Spain.
Because you can't openly revolt.
Yeah.
This is a period of great revolt, isn't it?
Yeah.
Across Europe.
That's right.
You can't openly do that.
The age of revolution.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So. I mean, revolution starts in secrecy with people saying, oh, I'm fed up of him, and, you know, oh, what do you reckon of this Prime Minister we've got?
So the Catholics kind of basically outlawed it because they saw it as a place where secrets can be talked about, a bit like why we shut down, you know, coffee shops.
Yeah, that's right.
Shut them down because people are talking and we don't want them to do that.
That's right.
Stop at home and sit and watch the internet and read the stuff, the filth that we feed them.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, with John Cousteau, for example, just going back to the Inquisition, his book reveals that these torturers were constantly saying, give us the ritual, tell me what happens behind closed doors, what's going on.
Right. So they were fearful.
Yeah.
Right.
So that shows that the Inquisition was, I mean, that's what
why
the Inquisition
reaction was so great.
Yeah.
Because the fear was so strong.
That's right.
Because it wasn't just the Freemasons they banned loads of them.
Yeah, I mean,
picked on them.
Going back into the medieval period, the Inquisition was there to get rid of heretics.
Absolutely.
And these heretics were not just witches, or they were people that were disagreeing with
Absolutely.
Yeah, with the
dogma and doctrine of the church.
Yeah.
So does Freemasonry make you a better man?
I believe it can do. You know, there's it's what I was saying before about the you know, search for hidden knowledge, and it's deep inside, and you've got to find it. And yeah, you know, I've met some great people in Freemasonry, but then again, I've met some people that, you know, are obviously in it for themselves, or, you know, not very nice. You know, there's good and bad everywhere, really. Whatever activity you get involved in, whatever career you go for.
Why just men? Why can't my wife join?
Well, there is a women's Freemasons. I mean,
why can't you all be together?
I would love that, because I think it'd be great.
Only because of the ritual. That's the only reason that you'd be interested.
The
bearing of the breast. That's the only reason.
The bearing of the breast. You know, I mean, I'm sure they could get around that.
You could sell
that
one to them, couldn't you?
Yeah. I think I might put something together later.
So there is a female. Was it co-masonry? It's called.
Yeah. yeah. And they've been going since I think it's the 1920s. So,
But they're not official, are they?
I don't think they're recognised by the United Grand Lodge at the moment. It's
bunch of stuffy men.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm all for getting women involved. You know, I think that'd be great.
Yeah.
I could live with that, I think.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Unless the wife turns up and stops you drinking.
Yeah. Well, you know, that's one thing. But yeah, I mean, I think that would be a good way for Freemasonry to go, really. You know.
So, if you had, you know, if all the people that are watching this were thinking, oh, well, I might go and join the Freemasons, give me like a little bullet point list of positives for it.
Positives for it would be you'd no matter if there is good and bad in the lodge that you join, there's always going to be some guys that are great and that'll help you out. They certainly helped me out with that. You know, with documents and things and point them in the right direction. And, you know, there is a good point to it with the people always going about the charities and things like that, which is good. And
the esoteric learning.
And the esoteric learning, the search for hidden knowledge.
Thing on the self is a good mirror.
Yeah, yeah.
So Freemasonry on one side of it, can be a good mirror for the self.
Yeah.
And it's got some ancient teaching in there, because it did actually, like you say, Elias Ashmole and Dee, they did go around and collect sacred knowledge.
That's right.
So that's how it's kind of crept in. So if you want to know more, the genesis of Freemasonry, it's a good kind of hard-hitting historical work. Hello and welcome to Gardener's World. Today we've got a really special show. We've got the expert Tim Wallace-Murphy on with us, the expert in Templars, in what's known as the Rex Deus, which we're going to get into soon, in the Holy Grail, in Freemasonry, symbolism, all manner of things. And people will know of Tim's work through the best-selling book that he had out with Marilyn Hopkins, Roslyn. A superb book, it really is. A read that everybody's got to get through, not least of which was a man known as Dan Brown, who used this for his book, The Da Vinci Code, which I'm sure really did the book sales pretty, a lot of good. One of his latest books is The Knights of the Holy Grail, which he's just given me, so I'm looking forward to reading this. I'm sure it's a fascinating read. It's a lovely cover, but this, again, goes into the Templars, so this is going to be fascinating. And, of course, another one of his latest books, it just doesn't stop writing, it makes me mad, is The Freemasons. This is really going to be interesting too, because I know that Tim knows an awful lot about the Freemasons from outside and inside, so this is good stuff. Tim, thank you very much for coming along.
It's a pleasure to be here again.
And putting me in the humble situation of having this greatness arriving in my chat show. I'm absolutely fascinated by one of your books, Rex Deus. This is a Latin title. Can we explain to people what this really means?
Well, with pleasure, but before I do, I've got to refute one horrible accusation you've levelled at me of being an expert. X is usually the mark of somebody who is illiterate, and a spurt is an intermittent drip. So if you're accusing me of being an illiterate intermittent drip, I'll cop a plea of guilty. The term expert in its common usage is one I detest. I'm a geriatric student. Okay. I've been following a particular path for over 37 years, and I'm fascinated by what I do. But I wouldn't claim expertise in the common sense. I know a little, I know enough to know where to look next. And that's all I need. Now, you mentioned Rex Deus. Many years ago, I was giving a talk about Rosslyn Chapel to a group of people in London. And afterwards, I was approached by somebody who claimed to be a direct descendant of Hugh de Payens, one of the co-founders of the Knights Templar. And also, he said he was a descendant of the original high priesthood of the temple in Jerusalem. I was fascinated by this idea, and I invited the man to dinner, along with another colleague of mine who had a working knowledge of European and biblical history, and we put this man to the question for 5.5 hours and tape recorded the entire thing. And then I spent some 6 or 7 years investigating, was there any validity to the story I'd been given. Now, the story was very simple, that during the time of the Greek kings in Israel, the temple had been defiled, and the original 24 high priestly families, who are known as the Mamadot, had moved from Jerusalem and left the temple because of it being defiled, and had set up shop at a place called Qumran. And these people later became known to history as the Essenes. And two things I already knew about the Essenes. One was that John the Baptist was most certainly an Essene, and secondly, that Jesus, the man that is known to history as Jesus of Nazareth, in fact should be more commonly called Jesus the Nazarene. And the Nazarenes were an offshoot of the Essenes. Nazareth, as such, didn't actually exist at the time of Jesus. So that's one of the many confections brought out by the church. Now, my informant, Michael, who'd collared me after this meeting in London, had given me an indication that the descendants of these 24 priestly families later became known in European history as Rex Deus, but they were very, very secretive. They continued to marry in the traditional Cohenite manner of the Jews of biblical Israel. In other words, they only married other Cohens. They only married people from the same group. And this became one of the keys in discovering who was who within these dynasties. And my colleague and co-author at that time, Marilyn Hopkins, and myself set out to test to destruction the idea that such a family dynasty could have continued and could have risen to power. As a result of many years of work, we discovered that not only was there some substantial reality behind this theory, but that some common form of belief had united these families to risk their lives, their properties, and their liberty, not once, but many times throughout European history, and that their most famous fruits by which they are known, although the origin of the Rex Deus theory wasn't known at the time, were in movements and initiatives that they started. Those movements include the foundation of the Knights Templar, the writing and propagation of the Grail sagas by Chrétien de Troyes and later by Wolfram von Essenbach.
They were very Cistercian linked.
Yes and no. I'll explain that in a little moment. They were also instrumental in propagating the first set of tarot cards, and the earliest complete set we have got are the Visconti set. There is another set in France called the Grigonneur, which again was promulgated by members of the Rex Deus dynasties. And the tarot cards, although they're used for all sorts of fortune telling, and perhaps quite validly so, who am I to comment, they were also used as playing cards, but they're actually flashcards. They're teaching boards, teaching heresy, a totally different form of belief system to the one promulgated by the church.
Makes a lot of sense.
And then later, the same families were also instrumental in founding another controversial order called the Freemasons. Now, you drop the word Freemasonry into any conversation today and stand by for fireworks. The conversation will reveal the prejudices of those around you, and depending on their religious perspective, they will be either pro or anti-Freemasonry, and it will be alleged by many that there is a worldwide conspiracy between the Jews and the Freemasons to run the world. And all I can say is, if that's the case, being both a Jew and a Freemason, how come I'm not Pope or head of state? I'm not even rich. Again, rather like the Templars, because very little factually is known outside the fraternity, it leaves room for speculation and accusation, which is spread like wildfire.
So in your books, you've actually uncovered evidence to prove that these families have existed, or have... I've got a golden thread through time.
First of all, we found that the whole principle of a hereditary priesthood did not actually start in Israel. It started much earlier in ancient Egypt. And in one program you recorded with that wonderful colleague of mine, Dr. Robert Feather, he mentioned the name Akhenaten. And Akhenaten was an Egyptian pharaoh who was deposed for nearly wrecking the Egyptian economy, oddly, for religious reasons. He instituted a form of monotheism. And Akhenaten, under another name, is actually far more widely known, and that other name is Moses. And if one wants to check on the validity of that particular insight, I would recommend the work by my colleague Ahmed Osman, Moses, Pharaoh of Egypt. The argument as to whether Moses was a pharaoh or an Israelite foundling has long since been settled by Egyptologists. They know he was a pharaoh, and the only argument is to which pharaoh was he. And my money is on Osman's choice, which is Akhenaten.
So Aaron would have been one of Akhenaten's brothers?
Brothers, yes. And the principle of hereditary priesthood was already well established in Egypt and just simply carried on. There wasn't a people of Israel known as the Israelites or the Hebrews at that time. And don't take my word for that. Check the words of Sigmund Freud, that great Jewish historian. He reckons that the word Hebrew didn't come into common usage until after the exile in Babylon in about 650 BC. So the idea that the Israelites were a separate nation who were enslaved in Egypt is regarded by most historians as spurious nonsense. They were Egyptians who were displaced to what had been an Egyptian colony or satrap state called Canaan. There was no forcible occupation. And from that developed what we now know as the people of Israel and the religion of early Judaism. And early Judaism didn't start to take on anything remotely like its present form until after the exile in Babylon. And it was after that period that the 24 high priestly families started to attain major importance. And we were able to trace from our research through tax records in Rome of the Roman Empire period the whereabouts of many of these families after the Jewish revolt finished in AD 70 until the time of the fall of the Roman Empire. Now then there becomes a hell of a gap from the time of the fall of the Roman Empire until the development of efficient bureaucracies in France, northern Italy and Spain, where you're looking at sort of the beginning of the 11th century. There are no independent ways of verifying family tradition. So hand on heart, it is not possible to prove the validity of this theory that they were descended from the priesthood of the Temple of Jerusalem.
Unless there's some kind of genetic way through the DNA.
The DNA test can prove the probability that it could be true, but again, it cannot prove an absolute fact. The Native Americans who got there many, many thousands of years, tens of thousands of years ago, and they would legitimately turn around to the Europeans who eventually arrived and say, oh, how much land did you bring with you when you came? You know, you're the people who are conspiring against us. You're back to perceived conspiracy again. And it's an innate part of human nature to see it that way. The dispossessed and the disempowered are always going to feel aggrieved.
But why do we feel disempowered? Why, why are vast sections of the world right now with access to the internet, with various things to get their voice out, to be read, why is actually that freedom of expression which they have on the internet, even books, self-publishing, why is it that it also brings at the same time this big surge in conspiracy thinking?
Because people don't understand how society works. And I'm not sure I do either. And that they don't understand. They either fight against or suspect, or they bow down and worship one or the other. You've only got sort of three basic attitudes. And this is the age of the conspiracy theorist. And who's to say that some of the things that have happened, for example, the involvement of the Banco Ambrosiana, the Vatican Bank, with the mafia, that there are not conspiracies? Yes, of course there are. But I think they're much more limited and much more secretive than anything we suspect. I think the real conspiracies we don't get to hear about, we only see the results. We're not even aware that they come from conspiracies.
So, I'm an individual, I want to have this spiritual enlightenment, and I've been told that Freemasonry or Knights Templar or whatever in the past had this kind of help in helping people get there. Is that still the case? And
Yes,
if
it
so,
is.
what are they able to offer?
What they're able to offer in the case of Freemasonry is an ancient form of teaching couched in ritual and allegory, which is incredibly effective when repeated over and over again. And it's not just the Knights Templar or Freemasons. Don't forget the Sufi tradition has moved westward in a very big time. The Kabbalistic tradition in one form or another is still very much alive and well. And there are ancient spiritual pathways from the East, from India, from Persia, which are just as valid today as they ever were. And this is the miracle of modern society. You go to any airport bookstore and books on spirituality of every variety abound. Some good, some bad, some indifferent. And one has to use discernment and search for yourself. I'm not in a position to say, you, Charlie, you go follow the Kabbalah, and Fred, become a Sufi. How the hell do I know? Mm-hmm. That's for them to decide. And that searching and use of that discernment is part of the transformative process and is an essential part of it.
Mm-hmm. So, where does that leave Tim Wallace-Murphy in the future?
Where does that leave Tim Wallace-Murphy in the future? Well, the future is a little cloudy. My crystal ball's on the blink, but I'm 79 years of age. I'm still having fun. I'm still enjoying what I do. I'm in love with life. I'm in love with a very beautiful lady. And I just look forward to the future with boundless curiosity to see what the hell is going to happen next.
Well, I think that's a wonderful way of finishing it. And Tim, very welcome here. Great to have you on. And good luck and enjoy life.
I will do that. Thank you.
Well, my next guest is a person who has been sharing part of that journey with Tim. Her name is Brom Bramadat, and she is actually very topical. Phil has been working on a project called The Ancient Code, and The Ancient Code is really about what the past can teach us about the present and what perhaps is lagging from the present, which should get re-injected. So, Dawn, first of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
First question, what can the past teach us to the present? What is it that you feel could be better at this moment in time? Because I've been observing you just before the show and over the past few hours, and what I get from you is a very balanced person, like the yin and the yang, the positive and the negative, but in the positive sense of the word. What is it that we are lacking as a society?
I don't think we're lacking anything. There's a study that was done, and I wish I could remember the name of the psychologist. She took a pie with a piece cut out of it, and Zygarnik was her name. And she took some monkeys and looked at where the monkeys were focusing their attention. They were looking at the pie. A human being will look at the piece that's missing. And so I don't think there's anything missing in our society. I think that we have within us a whispering, a remembering of oneness, of non-duality. And that is what will always make us feel disgruntled and incomplete until we come to that place of feeling whole. You were speaking previously about conspiracies. I think that conspiracies happen, and there's a proliferation of conspiracy when hierarchy and authority is very strong. And I think what we're going through now is a time when all hierarchical structures are dissolving, be they educational, ecclesiastic, banking, government. Everything that's shaped like this is falling down, right? And I think that this is a time when we can no longer afford to not accept our responsibility for our own lives and beings. That previously we were so busy just surviving, just you know, eating, making sure the kids are are safe and fed.
Job.
Well, even previous to that, actually. We were so busy doing all of that survival business that we put our physical welfare in the hands of doctors or shaman or medicine people, and we put our spiritual welfare in the hands of priests and rabbis. And I think we can't do that anymore. Each one of us is being asked, required, to take responsibility for who we truly are.
So we're being asked this, how do we progress from there? Because I think that's the challenge. What Tim was describing earlier was this classic stand of us versus them. Them seems to be falling apart.
Hallelujah.
Us seems to be just standing here as well and kind of like admiring the falling apart.
There's no us and them. We learn from, okay. We are created by lineages of ancestors who had specific belief systems that were encoded in their physical bodies. And so we come into this body that's formed by all of the lives and bodies and beliefs of the people before us. We come into that. And then also in the first part of our lives, we're well and properly programmed with what we are supposed to think, what we're supposed to be, what we're supposed to do. And then we blithely go on and do that. Except that humanity is just like light. We're particles as well as wave. And so we're not only individuals, we're part of humanity, we're part of the earth, we're part of our human and earth family. And we're all moving, evolving towards, in my belief, towards well, what's called in the Hebrew tradition tikkun olam. We're repairing the world from the original fall into duality. We're coming back to a place of oneness, that understanding and the ability to perceive oneness. So
us and them is disappearing.
Exactly. We learn judgment about the world. A lot of people use judgment in a very positive sense. But when I'm using the word judgment, I mean a barrier that's put up between us and them to make sure that we're safe. Our parents put up a playpen around us. And that playpen is actually more like a picket fence with posts in it, and each one of those is a judgment, okay? So don't pick your nose in public.
Or in front of the television.
That's right. Don't, you know, just to make sure that we inside this playpen are the good and the just and the clean. And on the other side, you've got the unwashed masses. And we just don't want to go there, right? They pray on a different day and they eat other things, and God forbid they marry, you know, whatever. So I think that the job that we have, what is being required of us, is to very carefully look at all the judgments and one by one take out all of these posts. As we do that, the us and them dissolves. The heart opens.
So is it that all what's needed? Is it just love? Is that all what's needed, or what else is there?
We certainly have heard that a lot, haven't we? And for a long time, and from a lot of people.
So why don't we get a message?
Well, because we're not there yet. We are being required in the most beautiful way to open our hearts to situations that we never had to before. You know, with the crumbling of the nuclear family and the reconstituting of families, you have to accept.
We'll go on after the break with that one. My guest still is John Bramadat, and we have just touched upon the topic of love, a very old, ancient code which still is around. It's driving bloodlines, it's driving everything, it's bringing two people together. It's a transformative power, it's what drives people in their daily existence. Is love as we know it all there is to know about love, or is there actually much more deeper understanding?
Well, first of all, what many people understand as being love is the neurotic chemistry that helps us through evolution. Let me explain. I said that we're programmed with our parents' images, patterns when we're very young, and then sometime around puberty we look at ourselves and say, uh-oh, does this mean that I have to be like her? And we choose at that point one of our parents to emulate, and the other one we hide inside ourselves, and we're never, ever going to be like that. And then the joke and the horror later on when we discover it is that who we are attracted to chemically, when there's a chemical attraction, that person, the stronger the attraction, the greater that person is likely to be just like the person that you never wanted to be like. So you have this wonderful mirror in front of you of who you never wanted to be like. And thank God there's chemistry, you know, in the beginning. The chemistry puts you together with people that you would never logically choose if you really knew what that person was like.
There's like a thing, isn't there, sometimes, whereby you just don't know what's there.
That's right. That's right. It's hormones. You know, hormones are the same reason that women keep having babies, because we forget the pain. Anyway, so, exactly. So you get together with someone, and then 6 months down the road, you start doing the work. And the work is where you do the same dance as you saw your parents doing and go, oh, no, maybe I can do this differently. Well, what I'm seeing with people that I work with is that what's happening these days is that we get together with someone and have children and act like our mummies and daddies, and then go, I don't want to do this. And then we leave that relationship and then find someone with whom we can develop further and become who we truly are. That's part of, you know, the process of taking the pickets out of the playpen, is undoing the identification with the parents' beliefs and allowing us the freedom to truly become who we are.
I mean, I definitely think that religion has tried to really put that playpen around human emotions, and the fact that there is so much divorce and various other things going is because it is slowly disintegrating. The question is, does it have to be such a hard lesson? Because for society as a whole and for people as an individual, it does come with trauma. So is that just part of the lesson of life, or finding true love, or finding all of these things, or how do we approach it in a perhaps better way?
First of all, again, I don't think that anything is necessarily not right about the world. I think I am not a natural pessimist.
So give us the positive news.
I think that, well, first of all, our beliefs create our realities. And so if we have a choice what we're going to believe, why not believe something that revolves around beauty and harmony? And I believe that all of the institutions and organizations, including patriarchy, have all had their roles and their importance in our evolution and bringing us to places of sometimes intense suffering so that we can then decide to let it go. You know? When we're talking about identities, identifying with a tribe, a religion. That identity is essential to our survival. If you take a one-celled organism and you poke at it, it's going to run away, right? Because its identity is based in its membrane. That's the difference between the external world and the internal world. But a human being has an extremely complex identity and can be therefore threatened in so many different ways.
And we are moving away, again, from the playpen, whereby society traditionally, and some societies in the world still choose for this no one is left behind kind of framework, whereby two people are put together, the duality is made one, and is kind of like, to some extent, protected. The Western world seems to have abandoned that almost completely and is letting people just play out all over the field. So what I'm trying to find out is, like, what's the best and easiest way throughout all of these duality playpen distribution kind of help again?
I think that we're okay. First of all, our belief structures are realities. Therefore, the world the life that I call around me is a reflection of what I have not yet understood about myself. And so that is one of the most important things, is becoming responsible in that way for the life around you. This is causing me pain and suffering, all right? What do I not understand about myself? Why have I called that into my life? What does that recall about what I learned when I was younger? The playpen analogy I use because I believe that we're at a place now where we can't stay in that infantile position in front of any form of authority. It's time that we really assume responsibility for our own divinity and capacity for co-creation of the universe.
Take up the challenge in a positive way and just go for it?
Well, if we don't, you know, again, because we're both particle and wave, we're being swept along in a process of evolution in any event. Whether we like it or not, we can try to just, you know, stay in one place, right? We can try that. But something is going to happen. I believe that as human beings we are evolving towards this oneness, and that if we try and fight that, we're going to call something into our lives. Illness, accident, whatever. We're going to call it into our lives, and that will stop us and require us to reflect.
And that's happening as well. Cancer is on a tremendous scale at the moment. Illnesses, allergies, literally mankind seems to be becoming allergic to the world. Again.
Isn't that an interesting thing, huh? Allergic to the world. Huh? It's because we're irritated with the state of the world as it is. Yes, and that... What's really interesting about my being here is that most people are promoting books, and I tell people not to read anymore. People will often ask me, okay, so what books can I read, you know, to help me out on this? I say, stop reading books. Go inside yourself. You are a treasure house. Each one of us is a treasure house of information. Everything we need is right here in this life, in this body. And particularly in this body. It's not looking outward into the cosmos and in finding fascinating, wonderful things, you know, to keep us busy up here. This is where it's about. The body, you were talking about the stone. Now, the Grail as being a stone. In indigenous teachings in North America, it's recognized that matter holds information. And our bodies are created of molecules that we know have been in clouds and stars and in
DNA, just
other beings. And so we're created of the earth in a very real way. We're created of the stars in a very real way. All of that is inside us in the physical body. The feminine divine has not been honored for a long time. And I believe that that is what is rising, so that masculine spirit-oriented spirituality is uniting with an understanding of the body and the earth as being not less than in any way.
So apart from the fact that the duality seems to be disintegrating, you're also saying actually the male principle is not perhaps disintegrating as such, but actually the female is kind of like
arising to become an equal partner.
So what's been happening between humans trying to find love for millennia, thousands of years, 40,000,
well,
perhaps
whether it's love or
meters.
sex or whatever, any form of duality, any form of definition of the other as something that I want,
possessing,
is a wanting of, is a cry for that oneness, for becoming whole, feeling whole. And I think that the feeling of wholeness we're moving to a place of feeling whole simply within ourselves.
So how far are we apart from that, do you think? There's lots of talk about 2012, all of these things, quite often with the aliens coming or the catastrophe which is going to unite us. It's again looking towards the others rather than taking charge of the situation ourselves and trying to do that as well. So,
wisdom keepers of the earth now, in all of the indigenous traditions of the earth, are doing several different things. They're going into safe places in the earth, often very high in altitude. They're doing a lot of ceremonial practices for earth healing, and as well as individual prayer and supplication for earth healing. But they're also teaching things to the unwashed masses that have previously only been taught to high initiates. The human body has become rewired, I believe. I think that we are able to carry a frequency that we were not able to carry before. That, you know, in the Bible, when people went, we could carry that now and still be in our bodies.
But it's the fact that daily existence is so much more intense than it was a few hundred years ago. Just the physical stress sometimes of having to cope with driving around Blackberries, this and that. You kind of like do wonder, like if you were to give this to a caveman, physically where he would be able to cope with that enormous amount of stress.
My kids are so amazing in the amount of information that they can process. And they're way, way, way beyond me in terms of their capacities to multitask, boys and girls, and in their quickness. I definitely, first of all, I expected them. I believed that they would surpass me, and therefore they did. We are evolving to a place where we are able to perceive oneness. What I see is the pineal gland opening. I see it opening like a flower. And it's, in a sense, the union. It's very similar to the bleeding heart in the center of the cross. You've got the forebrain and the hindbrain and the two hemispheres, and it's this at the center of that. And as it opens, in the same way as the heart has to open, often through heartbreak, as that opens, we're able to put duality into oneness.
Now, we have 30 seconds. You have got 30 seconds to give one message to the reader, which is, or the viewer rather. You have got, what is the next step? What should we do, apart from not reading books?
Walk consciously on the earth.
And that's something which you've been trying to do because you have got a farm, you live with the animals, and I'm pretty sure people who come with allergy to you quickly see it disappearing. So Dawn, thank you very much for being on my show, and may you be an inspiration for us all, and may you continue to do your work for a very long period of time.
Thank you.
So I would like to thank Tim Wallace-Murphy and Dawn Bramadat for two wonderful interviews which have shown something of the yin and yang, and I'm happy to hand it over back to Phil Gardner in the near future.
As well, thanks for joining me. I'm going to get straight into it tonight. We've got a couple of guests. My first guest is an archaeologist and an author of several books, but tonight we're going to be talking about one in particular, a book on a place called Royston Cave, which is really interesting. Her name is Sylvia Beeman. Thank you very much for joining me tonight on the show. Now, you're also the founding member of a certain society as well, which is quite relevant.
Yes, that's right. I'm the founder of the society called Subterranea Britannica, and this is the British one, but in actual fact we liaise with other groups on the continent, also now into Russia and Eastern Europe.
Right, and in your book, Royston Cave, used by saints or sinners,
yes,
is obviously it's a cave, so it's subterranean.
It's subterranean, and it's really because of my work on Royston Cave that I became really interested in underground sites as well as the Templars, and it's because of the underground sites that I eventually founded the Society Subterranea Britannica.
Right, right. So Royston Cave.
Yes.
Some people will know about Royston Cave, not everybody. I mean, when I was introduced...
Few people know about Royston Cave.
So what is it and where is it?
I think the reason why it's not very well known is because it is actually in the centre of a very small market town in in Cambridgeshire and Hertfordshire. Why I say that is actually now in Hertfordshire, but originally it was on the boundary between Cambridgeshire and Hertfordshire and on the boundary of 5 villages or parishes.
Right.
So this is why it's quite an extraordinary little place.
And I take it you looked into the history of the surrounding area and...
Oh yes, I looked into all the areas around. Because you find that if you go to the record offices, some records are in Hertfordshire, some are in Essex, others in Cambridgeshire, and even Herefordshire. We all turn up records there because the spelling was similar to Hertfordshire.
Right,
so that's why they turn up anywhere. And as Royston is also post-Doomsday, therefore it was only, as I say, the boundary of these 5 parishes. There's really not very much known about Royston until later years.
So when was the cave found?
The cave was discovered in 1742, and I often think it was probably rediscovered as opposed to discovered. What happened was there were some women who were in the butter market, which was housing above, and these women wanted a bench to sit on, as they were fed up with obviously marketing all day and not having anywhere to sit. And they called in some workmen, and these workmen, they hammered through a large post into the ground, and then when they hammered it, suddenly it disappeared. And the post disappeared through the eye of a millstone. They actually got it in the right place, in a sense.
Amazing.
And they pulled up the millstone to find there was a shaft, and this shaft was full of lumps of chalk and stuff. So they decided that perhaps they'd investigate it. So they started pulling out the chalk and found there was definitely a shaft going downwards. And then a young boy was lowered down. I often wonder whether he was forced to go down or he was bribed to go down, but anyway, he went down on a rope. He came back and said that there was a chamber below, and then it's all recorded in the Society of Antiquaries minutes. And next they let down a man, a thin man, it's recorded, this thin man was lowered down, and he reported the boy was absolutely right, but there were 2 chambers, he felt. And it was full, the bottom half was actually full of garden mould. And what they did was they decided to take out the garden mould, but all the population kept crowding around because they thought there was going to be treasure down there.
Right.
And so it was emptied out at night. Well, 1742 there were no archaeologists. In fact, I think they probably could have thrown the baby away with the bathwater because they said there was these loads of earth was taken out. But amongst the finds that were recorded was 1 skull, human skull, 1 or 2 human decayed bones, Some bits of medieval pottery, a drinking cup, they thought, brown with yellow spots on it, and a piece of brass without any inscription on it, and that was all. But as they started to lower down and take out the earth, they uncovered the walls, and the walls had engravings all the way around, and they were coloured, and some of them were enhanced with darker pigment to show them like 3D. And what was on the walls were figures of saints, crucifixions, but there's lots of signs and symbols that are not purely Christian.
Right. So the only finds that they actually had were a few bones and a medieval cup or so.
That's all.
And that's it. Nothing else was discovered that we know of.
No.
Because this was a period of just, not, like you say, there were no archaeologists. There were just kind of antiquary type people.
There was one other item that came into the possession of Stukely, who was to come along later and look at the cave, and that was a little pipe maker's seal with a single fleur-de-lis on it.
A fleur-de-lis?
Yes, and I have to say that I've written in my book about this because I do wonder where the Templars also used the single fleur-de-lis as one of their symbols, because it does mean it's the symbol of the Virgin Mary.
Yeah.
And also at the local Hitchin, there's actually a coffin lid which has got single fleur-de-lis all around it, and it was the coffin lid of Argentine, who was a Templar, and he'd come from Melbourne, which is one of the parishes near to Royston.
Oh, so there's a link.
There's a link again, but I can't prove this. It's just a suggestion.
This pipe, what period?
That they don't know.
It was
just it was alleged to be found in the field. Somebody picked it up and gave it to Stukely later on.
Okay.
That's the sound from the studio for the recording. Okay, if you can just carry on from the point that went a bit wrong there with the sound.
Yes, that was a good one, wasn't it? Okay.
Where were we up to?
Okay, so how old do you think that this cave could possibly be then? I mean, you know, that humans used it, or was it hacked out? Was it natural?
No, the cave is definitely man-made.
Right.
I personally think it could be as old as the Neolithic.
Really?
Well, it is. Royston Cave is on the crossroads, which I haven't mentioned before. It's on the two main the roads across Britain, Ermine Street and Icknield Way. And Grimes Graves, which of course is famous for the flints from the Neolithic and Bronze Age period, is on the Icknield Way. And I do wonder whether the early man was looking for flints in chalk. They knew that chalk held flints. And Royston Cave is approximately 30 feet deep, which is the same depth as what normally found at Grimes Graves. But in the chalk, which is Middle Horizon chalk in Royston Cave, you only have little flints in there, not the large flints or the floor stone that you get in Grimes Graves. So I think it could be as early as that. Then any underground site, which I have, of course, studied underground sites with my other work, can be used over and over again if it is reasonably dry. It does flood sometimes in Royston Cave, but other times it's reasonably dry. But any site that is good underground can be used right through to contemporary times. Because it's just a useful underground site. It can be for even filling up with coal, or some people have used sites underground for nuclear shelters and things right up to the present day.
Well, what are some of the reasons that people have used underground sites in the past? Because that's what we're talking about.
Yes,
the
that's right.
Quite distant past as well.
Yes.
So the underground sites have been used for all kinds of things, haven't they?
Oh, amazing.
Such as?
Well, we've got sites that can be used as ice houses. Sometimes you can have an ice house that's made itself. Sometimes you can have an ice house that's been adapted inside even an old, a natural cave.
You'd rarely use you'd rarely put symbols of religious significance in an ice house, wouldn't you?
No, exactly. But in the Royston Cave, I think it has had several uses. So, in fact, it was Parkin's work. There were three men who wrote about the cave before I came along: Stukely, Parkin, and Beldam. And Beldam, in particular, he was looking at it in the mid-1800s. And he thought that, again, it was anterior to Christ, and it might have been used by the Romano-British people, because he felt it could have been a columbarium, because there are some niches around the cave, and he felt that perhaps there'd been cinerary urns placed there.
Right.
And then later on, he did feel that perhaps it had been crusaders returning to this country, and this is where I've come in, followed on from him. He thought they may have actually copied what they'd seen in Jerusalem, say the Holy Sepulchre Church, for example, and I've said this later, but he said they may have seen things in Jerusalem, and also Ashkelon. There are some underground similar shaped structures, but I have to say at the present time, you can guess why I can't find out much more about them. Very on the Gaza Strip, it's a rather sensitive area, and always was.
We just had to cancel trips out there at the moment because we were going to go out and do some investigating.
Well, there you go.
So
you know exactly what I mean.
Terrible situation for the poor
people. Of course it is. I mean, I think it's horrendous.
But the symbols and things that are in this subterranean cave that you've discovered, I've seen some of them very similar things in caves across Europe.
That's right.
From that period that you're talking about, post-Crusader period.
Because I have discovered that definitely the Templars did own property in Royston.
Right.
The actual whereabouts is not known, but it's recorded that the property owned by the Templars passed to the Hospitallers, which was quite normal, which happened when they were disbanded in 1308, and that the property passed, it was King Henry VIII's letters and papers where it is recorded that this land from the Templars to the Hospitallers then was taken in, of course, to the Crown at the time of the Reformation.
Right.
So it's definitely known the Templars were there. Also, it is recorded Templars on their lands in Baldock and Weston were around Baldock. They also had a preceptory at Baldock, and the Templars came to Royston for the purpose of marketing every single week from 1199 to 1254. I personally think that they needed somewhere to store their market goods. Because anyone who travels along the 505 from Royston to Baldock will know it's very hilly. The day marketing was normally 6 miles walking.
The marketing, when you say marketing, most people in the modern world will think of, you know, TV adverts and commercials. We're talking selling goods at trade, at market.
See, Royston still has a market, so this is why I'm a bit prejudiced in favour of this. A market used to be where people had stalls, and then they sold their goods.
And the Templars actually came along and sold things at markets?
Yes.
What kind of things did the Templars sell?
Was butter, cheese, wine from their vineyards. They even had vineyards at Weston, which is quite close to Royston, of course, at Baldock, and leather goods, and also corn and things like this, so that it was a proper market there. And because Royston, again, was on these boundaries of the 5 parishes, there is this stone called the Royce Stone. Some people think Royston's is a contraction of the word Royce Stone.
Right.
And it did have a cross in it, so it was like a market cross. But that could have been originally a marker stone. And that's where you get the word sometimes market from, a marker stone, because that's where people gathered together to exchange goods. I mean, for example, salt was very important in the medieval period. And so, exactly. Yeah. So this would have been another place where they could have sold salt.
Well, the Templars were quite, you know, well known for selling and making salt.
Exactly.
Across Europe.
And also, remember, their word Czech is Arabic, which has come into our language, which is, of course, brought in by the Templars. And they also had bills of exchange and things. And money.
They were an incredible machine, really, weren't they? You know,
they were.
Big corporate machine.
They really were. Yeah. And I have also suggested that maybe, because the people in Royston were so keen that there might have been treasure underground when the cave was originally opened, I wonder if there'd been rumours that there had been perhaps money held in Royston somewhere, because the Templars did take up and down the country hoards of money, and for the Crown, and it might have been a safe house as well, because I think they used the top half of the cave probably for storing the market goods, and then they constructed, or either the cave always was as deep as it was, about 18 feet deep and 18 feet in diameter, but I think the bottom area was created as an oratory for the Templars themselves, and that's why I think most of the engravings have actually been done by Templars.
What's an oratory?
Oratory is another word for a small little wayside chapel.
Right. And do the symbols that are within the cave back that up at all?
Yes, they do.
Right, so let's talk a bit about the symbols.
Yes, well, one of the main symbols is called the Hebraic Quaph, Q-U-A-P-H, which is like what I call is an axe with a loop over the top. And that appears in the cave 3 times.
A little bit like an ankh?
Yes. No, the ankh's the other way.
So this is a cross?
Cross with a loop over the top.
OK.
Yes.
Do we have a picture of this, sort of?
Yes.
Which page is it?
Oh, gosh.
We don't know?
No.
OK, not to worry. No. So it's a cross with a loop over the top. And why is that important?
Because It means it's a dichotomy of the Templars. The French have said this. It's because you've got the temporal and spiritual together, and they're linked together in the cross.
Right.
And a good description of the Templars is that they were monks of war, because they were a religious faction and they were also a military faction. And so this links the two together. And you've got it, as I say, it appears on the cave, but it also appears in the Château de Chinon, in the Tour de Coudray, on their wall where it is attributed Templar graffiti. I mean, it's not proven, but it's very close, and I've seen it elsewhere as well.
So that's one particular symbol, and there's plenty more symbols to go through in this
And
cave.
also, the main altar in the Little Oyster Cave is on the west, and in our country, all altars should be on the east.
That's very interesting.
Yes, and you have to remember that in the Holy Sepulchre Church, which was the mother church of the Templars, on the western apse is the main altar. And that's because if you're in Jerusalem, which was known as the centre of the earth for religious purposes, you can have your altar any which way because you're there. So if the cave was an emulation of the Holy Sepulchre Church, then I feel that this is one of the reasons why the main altar is on the west.
That's fascinating.
Yes, and you've also got crucifixion scenes and saints, St Christopher, St Catherine.
Well, we'll go
St.
through a
Lawrence.
few more of the symbols after the break.
Yes, all right.
But it's fascinating. I mean, west and east, for those people who don't realise,
Yes.
we have the rising sun and the setting sun,
Yes.
which is really quite important. But
Exactly.
we'll get back to this more after the break.
Thank you.
Hello and welcome back to Gardner's World. We've got on Sylvia Beeman, who's written this marvellous book, Royston Cave, Used by Saints or Sinners, which we're discussing. And we've discussed the period that this came from. You think that it probably dates back to Neolithic, but we're discussing particularly the medieval period, or
Yes.
certainly the post-Templar period,
Yes.
post-Crusade period.
Yes.
Other symbols that we've got in this cave which give you an indication that, that it's Templars.
To start off with, you have these various saints which are revered by the Crusaders.
Right.
You have St Catherine. St Catherine also, you'll find that in Bristol is that the Templar Church is dedicated to St Catherine. St Catherine was important because she is the first person after the Virgin Mary in the hierarchy of medieval art. You have St Lawrence. He's also shown on the cave. He was known to the Templars. St Christopher with the Christ child. Also, of course, he was the symbol of for travellers. And there's another figure, a very interesting figure, who some people felt was possibly St George. And originally, when I started writing the book, I thought, yes, it was, because similarities with a helmet, like Uccello's helmet. But later on, it is, Dr. Bowes came, who was a medievalist historian, and he said he felt it was Christ the soldier.
Yes.
Also, it's on the southeast side, and it could also be St Michael, because St Michael's normally on the south. Now, whether they are not, nobody knows, but what I meant was I have put forward all these suggestions because I do feel when you're writing any book, you should draw on what people have said before and their theories, so that you've got something that you can look at and go forward from. Now,
Just going back to
yes.
the things that were found in there, you
Yes.
said that there was a skull.
Yes.
Have you looked into that as well?
Yes, I have. Now, the skull, or a skull, could be used in Templar rites. And also, the skull and crossbones means for the afterlife. Now, also, there are some heads shown on the walls engravings that are on their own. And if you go to the Château de Chinon in the Tour de Coudray, where the attributed Templar graffiti is, you also see heads on their own again. Then you'd ask yourself, could this be tied up with a Turin shroud? And like everything else, is that I have tried to put down what is there, not try to add to it within reason, because I think most things stand by themselves and people should look into them and then look forward from them. But one of the things I do feel is I have tried to do is, if this is associated with the Templars, which I think it was at some time, But it doesn't mean that all the graffiti was done by the Templars, because it's not possible. Stylistically, you can only date the cave on the stylistic drawings, engravings. Because any underground site, the people that come after you, they actually clear out everything that was there before. So archaeologically, there's very little to be seen.
Apart from the skull, is this still in existence?
No, there's no knowledge of where the skull is or the little pipe maker's seal.
Oh,
now, I have got some pieces of pottery, brownie red with yellow spots on, which is now in our museum, because there was a little excavation done, not by myself at this particular time, or because I wasn't a qualified archaeologist anyway. It was done by some local people, and there were some little pieces of this pottery found, which is now, and it was held under somebody's workbench for some years. But anyway, it's all now being recorded, it's put in the museum. But Miss Donnell and myself, in the early 70s, 74, we did have a small excavation, with permission from the Department of Environment, it was all done properly, following a resistivity test of the floor of the cave by Dave Seward and Short Allerton from Geodesy and Geophysics in Cambridge. That was an official resistivity testing, because they did realise that on the floor there was some cavities, little cavities, which turned out to be a post hole, which showed that in all probability there had been the second story and been supported at some time. Yeah. But you can't tell, even if you have some post holes, whether it had been a veranda running round or a complete flooring. And at one time, because the cave could have been as early as the Neolithic and lots of people using it, you could have had a veranda at one time and a complete floor another. So it's very difficult when you actually look at something.
It's still a very enigmatic place there,
It's still enigmatic, and I'll always say to people it is still enigmatic, and I think it's wonderful that people are still going forward and making other suggestions.
So can people get into this cave now? Or?
Oh yes, it's open to the general public between Easter and September.
Right.
And 2:30 to 5 in the afternoon, on a Saturday and Sunday afternoon. Right. And the latest theory is that perhaps this may have been a Freemasons lodge, or the first Freemasons lodge. Now, I have to say that that's not particularly what I think it is, but I do think everybody's entitled to their views and what they think it might be. And it's true to say that King James I of England and VI of Scotland had his hunting lodge, or it was actually, we now call it the Palace, only a few yards away from the cave. And it is attributed sometimes that it was King James I who did bring down Freemasonry to England. So there we go. But I have to say, I do think it would have been a bit strange for this king to be climbing down this narrow shaft, but maybe if he was someone who liked doing things like that, perhaps he did.
Royals have always done strange things. That's definitely
because the cave only had one entrance in, and then eventually a second one was found.
So it was backfilled, I understand. When was
it was probably backfilled around the Reformation period.
Right.
But you see, if it had been used by James I, then it would be a lot later than that.
Yeah.
But you see, this is the trouble. I feel that if it had been in James the first time, why was it backfilled? It could have been left open, but
still much to learn on Royston Cave.
There's a lot to learn.
Well, you know, we're all very thankful for the work that you've done, and this is a fascinating book.
Thank you.
And I understand it's coming out in paperback
soon.
Oh,
it is, certainly, yes.
So under Temple Publications.
Yes,
so
it is.
we'll look forward to that.
It's having a nice new cover,
lovely,
bronze-coloured with red cross on it.
So we'll look forward to seeing that. And thank you very much, Sylvia, for coming on this show. It's much appreciated.
Thank you
very much.
Bye-bye.
Well, the next on the show tonight, we've got a fascinating guy, David Humphreys, who has written a book that I couldn't put down. I read it in one go, and it's The Lost Book of Enoch, which I need to show to that camera. It's a superb book, not least of which because you really can't find this kind of book anywhere. It's not something that you can just nip down to the library normally and pick up a book of Enoch and delve into. So what David has done is remarkable. David educated in management, worked for the Ministry of Defence Research, all kinds of different things, and he's with me now. David, thank you very much for joining me on the show.
Thank you for the opportunity to come and discuss my book with you.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. Now, Lost Book of Enoch.
Yes.
Who's Enoch and why is it important?
Well, I came across Enoch whilst thumbing through the Bible some years ago. It was in the book, one of the letters of St. Jude, and he mentioned and quoted Enoch. And that got my interest going, because I couldn't find anything in the Bible initially as a book of Enoch, not in the Apocrypha. So I looked back into the Genesis, and there's mention of Enoch being a very upright man who walked with God, and which obviously from his writings, which I later discovered, meant that he was favoured by God and he had spiritual wisdom.
Right.
He was shown things that he revealed in his writings. So it took me a little while to discover earlier books written by people, experts, but one was by a chap called C.H. Charles from Oxford University, and it took scripts and all sorts of information which he had gathered, and he compiled a book which was published in 1912 by the Oxford Press, which gives a detailed examination showing all the different texts. There's ancient Hebrew, Ethiopic, Arabic, and what he did was he compared every single one of the texts. Now, for an ordinary person like me, when you pick it up and you think, my gosh, you've got all this ancient writing down here, you know, but I was so enthused with it that I actually sat down and went through all the interpretations, bit by bit, and prayerfully, I must say, I managed to get it all down, and hence the book.
So, The Fashion of Enoch, thousands of years later, you've actually sat down and put back together, what the guy wrote.
Right.
How long ago was it that Enoch?
I started, it must have been the late 1990s.
Right, and Enoch was from?
He was born in the 7th generation from Adam.
Right, we can't date that specifically.
Well, not really, no, but we could say that from the work in Genesis, that he lived for an incredible period of over 300 years.
Right.
So you imagine, hopefully he didn't have a lot of arthritis. So
No.
at the age of 300, I should think he must have been
taking the vitamin tablets.
I should imagine
Yes,
so, or some elixir.
So,
But,
I mean, Enoch is used by various kind of mystics and magicians throughout time, people like Dr. John Dee with his Enochian magic and what have you. So what is it so special about what Enoch's written?
The thing I found with Enoch was his writings was for the future, for future generation. The things he spoke about wouldn't have made sense in his day, or even 2,000 years, or even 600 years ago. He mentions through his work, through his scripture, that we must not interfere with the order, natural order of things. Now that wouldn't make any sense to anybody. So how can you interfere with the order of things? But today we're doing just that. To global warming, there's all sorts of things that are going wrong because through our world we're now polluting our environment.
So he was kind of one of the very first environmentalists.
That's right. So his writing was for a future generation, and I felt this is our generation that we're in.
And that's why you felt the need to do this?
That's right.
Right. So Enoch, was he a mystic?
I think by virtue, as he said in the Bible, that he walked with God. That would mean that he would have spiritual
Communion
guidance.
with God.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Very
And
Gnostic.
That's it.
Thing.
And as it states in his book, his travels throughout the heavens. I mean, the early church idea, quite often a lot of people think that heaven is if it's a place that does exist, and when you leave this earth, you'll be on top of a cloud playing with your harp or whatever instrument. But no, it made a realism. There was a real place, there were mountains and all sorts of things that he showed us. So heaven is a place that does exist beyond the world.
So what is he really telling us? I mean, is he telling us that we need to stop being so material, stop worrying about whether we've got the same things next door neighbours have got? And
that's right.
And
he addresses really things which have happened in the human psyche, irrespective of the time, right through history.
This is one of the very first kind of psychologists that we're
Yes,
talking
in a
about.
way. It's just saying, look, hang on a moment, look at what you're doing, how you are reacting to others. The rich, with all their wealth and the fine foods and wines, and they become haughty with it and some bombastic. Then you've got the poorer people who have to be careful what they say to the managers of today or the directors, you know. There was that sort of two-tier class system. But it's because of the arrogance that he could see in human nature that he was warning against us that it is going to trip us up. We're going to pay that price.
I mean, when I was reading, you know, your interpretation, your reinterpretation of these texts that you're talking about for the Lost Book of Enoch, what was striking me was that it's almost an alternative Gnostic gospel. You know, there's a lot of people today, a lot of books sold on the Gnostic Gospels, and everybody's jumping on the Gospel of Thomas and Judas and Mary and all the others. And this is kind of another one of those, but from before those.
I would say it's probably the original.
Yes, so it's even before the Gnostic Gospels.
That's right.
You know, this is even more important, because would they have used this?
May well have done.
Because
I mean, the actual book of Enoch was banned in 300 by the Christian Church.
The Christian
Church banned it. Was banned by St. Justin and St. Augustine.
So the Catholics banned it.
That's banned it.
And is it still banned?
Well, as I said, the original writings have only come into existence since about the 1800s.
Right.
And as I say, Sage Charles his task was to actually bring this all together and make sense of it.
What reason did the Catholic Church give for banning?
Well, I believe initially part of it may be that he's on about the wealthy, the fine wines and foods, and then you've got people still starving. And he talks about the winds around the sun and not interfering with the balance of nature, I mean, which probably would make sense to them. And the early church were very much into accusing people of heresy, like they did one or two, I think, Michelangelo, one or two other the people in the 14th century came up about the world going around the sun, and he was a heretic and he wasn't accepted. But also there was a Latin version of the Book of Enoch, and apparently Charles found that the translation was so poor that the translators were actually putting things into a different way than actually Enoch stated. So I think that sort of tripped them up. They read this Latin version and they said, what else would do as a reason to ban it?
As if the Catholic Church would do such a thing.
What they want.
God forbid.
Well, there we are.
He did, though, didn't he?
That's right. That's where we are today.
No man take. Yeah, I remember the text from the Bible. So, and this is fascinating stuff that we need to get a little bit deeper into, because I'd like to get into some specifics of this afterwards, what it is talking about. But what I'm really, really interested in is this getting back to nature concept, that we've come too far from where we need to be as human beings.
Yes.
You know, in balance and one with nature.
We're too materialistic.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're paying that price now.
And credit crunch is one of those things that, you know, we're borrowing the future. I mean, it's just totally wrong entirely. So it really is a book for today, isn't it?
It is indeed, yes.
Yeah. So even more so than probably the Gnostic Gospels in that respect.
That's right.